Hi, my name is Harry Poole, and I'm a clinical scientist working in radiology physics at the University Hospitals of North Midlands NHS Trust. I'm here today to talk about the work that I have done in collaboration with Sally Klee from the National School of Healthcare Science and the medical physics practice educators from across the country. To help structure my presentation, I'm going to be using the Driscoll model of reflection. Firstly, we'll look at what prompted the discussions we had surrounding reflective practice. I'll then go on to talk about how I went about setting up my reflection workshops, before concluding with comments on where I feel that the effort should be focused on next. For those that have somehow missed out on reflection so far, a critical reflection is the process of looking back on an event and digging down deeper to help truly understand what happened. We often do this without thinking about it, but as part of the STP training, we are asking for it to be a more conscious process for the trainee. In September 2022, the National School rolled out a new training syllabus in medical physics as well as many other specialisms across the STP. As you can see, many of the rotational training activities now require the trainee to reflect on an event or an experience. We had already identified, as a result of transitioning to the IAC assessment, that reflective writing was something that local trainees were struggling with. Speaking with these local trainees, they gave me feedback that they didn't really know what a good reflection was, nor how to write one. I started looking into this further by asking around if reflective training already existed within the Trust, but quickly realised that outside of junior doctors' induction, nothing really existed. Around the same time, I also reached out to the National School and was first introduced to Sally Klee, who is the Education Training Manager at the National School. I identified that reflection training forms a significant part of early modules within HST, and having done these modules, I figured it was good time to put this to use. The first session I put on saw local trainees and trainers from across medical physics working in small groups and reflecting on example scenarios. The hour-long session was largely practical and was used to introduce reflection and various reflective models. As this was my first session, it was quite daunting to teach a subject that I was no means an expert in. However, the session went well and ignited a lot of conversation about where reflections fit into healthcare science roles. Following the success of the local sessions, I felt it was a kind of session that was needed on a wider scale. We hosted a medical physics regional scientific meeting in September 2023. And I took advantage of this opportunity to talk more about reflection on a wider scale. This session was to a larger group with only 30 minutes allocated to it. I therefore had to tweak the session to be more of an interactive session rather than a practical session. Although again, feedback was positive, I felt that this interactive session didn't work quite as well as the practical session I hosted in smaller groups. If I were to do this again, I would definitely be breaking people down into smaller groups and reintroducing the practical aspects of the session that worked so well. In preparation for this talk, I reached out to some of the medical physics practice educators from across the country. They, similar to me, had put on reflective practice sessions too, some of which echoed my thoughts on larger groups and making sure that the sessions remained as practical as possible. One idea that we discussed was the use of hybrid or online sessions. The conclusions from these discussions were that they were trickier to put on, but enabled us to reach to a wider audience. The structure of each workshop began by me setting up ground rules. Ground rules are an effective way to confirm with everyone that the session is a safe place and helps conversation flow more comfortably. Similarly, an icebreaker activity warmed everyone up and broke down those initial awkward silences within the group. Some examples that have been used include games to get people up and talking to each other. The traditional form of teaching introduced 3 reflective models: Driscoll, Kolb, and Gibbs. The attendees were asked to appraise each of these models and discuss their strengths and weaknesses within their small groups. Using these models, the group were then asked to discuss example scenarios and comment on which of the models worked best for each scenario. Finally, the session concluded by looking at goal setting. Successfully setting goals by using tools such as SMART helps to ensure training targets are met. Feedback from the workshops was really positive. Trainees wanted the sessions to be held as early as possible within the rotation so that they could hit the ground running when they first start. They also asked for more support through regular drop-in style sessions or one-to-one coaching sessions to help them through specific issues. From the trainers, the feedback was largely, "Don't stop here." They felt that others in the department would benefit from this. Not only that, but as I had asked the question about reflective training in the trust, suddenly I was being asked to run reflective sessions for others across the trust. On top of this, there was a noticeable improvement in quality of trainee submissions. Trainees were no longer finding themselves having their submissions rejected, and similarly, trainers weren't having to read as many redrafts. We still have work to help embed reflective practice into the everyday. By encouraging new trainees, more trainers, and others in our department, we can change the way people perceive reflective practice. Something that came up in our discussions that I had with the medical physics practice educators was about future sessions and being mindful of specialist trainees having a slightly different focus to their training activities. This being the case, there is still room for reflection, but it's just not the main focus in those training activities. I have also reached out to some of our local universities to encourage the introduction of reflective practice to trainees within their first university block. This is something that I've discussed, and they are looking into how this might be possible. I encourage you all to do the same if you think this is something of value to your trainees. To further support both trainees and trainers, Sally and the rest of the team at the National School have produced some really comprehensive training materials for both trainees and trainers. Similarly, HCPC and various professional bodies have their own materials looking at reflective practice. I've put QR codes out for 2 of these resources. Finally, as I've alluded to, the medical physics practice educators and I discussed sharing reflective material. I've set up a Google Drive in which we share resources and slides in order to help roll this further out across trusts around the country. If you're interested in doing so, please get in contact with me. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone helping me with this project. From Sally at the National School for her support throughout all of this, as well as the medical physics practice educators for all sharing their experiences with me. And if you have any questions or you'd like to know a bit more about the reflective practice workshops, please drop me an email. You can see my email address on screen now. Thank you very much for listening.